Ladies and gents, hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be doing a full case study breakdown of how we helped one of our students, Anya, go from absolutely nothing but a corporate marketing background to a six-figure business in less than 3 months' time. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down absolutely everything from her situation before, what her goals were, how her business looked inside out, and every single game plan step that we took to get her from absolutely nothing to a six-figure business, making $10,000 to $15,000 a month within, I think it was 3.5, maybe 4 months' time. And this video is going to be a great one. We've got lots of tips and tricks and hacks to share of how we actually took the skill set that she didn't even know that she had, but she took from working in a corporate background and turned it into a six-figure business using no schemes, no ploys, nothing but her skill set and a framework that we follow. And now I don't want you to look at this doc and just think, cool, this is all I need and I can replicate this, because every single thing that we're going to go through, as well as her game plan, had individual components put in place for a very specific reason, and we took actions based on actions that were taken previously that produced results that gave us some indication to take action. So if you really want to learn exactly how we did what we did, I really suggest that you grab a notepad, grab a pen, lock in and take some notes, because this is going to be a good one. Now, the first thing that we're going to start off with, as you can see on my little notepad here, is her before, because I think it's important to understand the context of where she was at before we started working together, and also understand her goals of where we wanted to go, or where she wanted to go, so you can kind of get a really good understanding of why we implemented what we implemented in order to actually get her there. So her before kind of situation was quite average, to be honest. I mean, she was fresh out of the corporate marketing world. I believe that she was working as a marketer within a corporate company, obviously, within a company within the corporate world, and it was within the sustainability niche. That was kind of her her unique advantage. Well, that's what we ended up identifying later on anyway. So fresh out of the corporate marketing world, and again, like I said, she was experienced in her skill set. So Anya didn't come from a position of having no skill at all. I mean, it did take some time to actually identify her skill, but she did have experience nonetheless. She did, however, have no experience of running a business, so all she had was a skill set itself. Again, she came out of the corporate world, didn't really want to obviously work for a company anymore, but wanted to run her own thing, wanted to be her own business owner, her own boss, and exactly that's what we did. So her goals. Now, her first goal was to, of course, start her own business, and we ended up doing that pretty successfully well. We turned her again from working the corporate background to a six-figure business owner. Her goal was to make about 5 to 7K a month, as I can remember on the first call and conversation that we had. And her goal as well was to move country. I believe that she wanted to move, I want to say this right, from somewhere in Europe back to South Africa, but she couldn't do that with the role that she had at her job. And so she wanted to start her own business, so she had the freedom and the flexibility to actually be able to do that. So the next thing I actually want to go through are the foundations of her business, because in order to understand why we did what we did, you need to understand exactly what the different foundational components were of her business. And now there's two different aspects of business that I always go through whenever I work with someone. Again, Anya was just one of my students, so it was the same process I went through. And that was firstly identifying her foundations. It wasn't actually identifying her foundations, but it's going through the foundations and really picking out what makes sense to her. And then, of course, we go through the variables, and the variables are basically things that change within the business and constantly update and improve, and we tweak depending on the data that we get. And the foundations are things that typically we kind of choose, and then once we choose them, we leave them. We don't really make too many changes to them or too many updates, like, you know, picking your market for your business, for example. You kind of pick a niche and you kind of stay with that niche, unless there's obviously a lot of data that you get back in return that suggests that that is a bad niche to choose. You typically stay with the niche. Same thing of offer, skill, pricing, and USP. So let me give some context. Now, the market that we ended up choosing with Anya was actually sustainability startup companies. And there's a very specific reason for that. Because like I said, her previous role was actually doing marketing for sustainability companies, but she was doing it under the role of another company. And so she wanted to take what she had learned and start her own thing. And so we identified that to actually be her unfair advantage, advantage and an understanding that she had that allowed her to basically go into this market, into this new role, being 3 steps ahead of other people, because if she was going to look at her competition, other people who were doing marketing for sustainability companies, she would find it very, very difficult to actually really identify why they should choose her. And so we thought, okay, cool, let's just work within the same niche that you already understand, you already get very well. And because of the sustainability space, they work with like a particular type of people, because you really have to understand all of the components of what make a company sustainable. And when it comes to marketing, that's also obviously incredibly important, because you are the messenger of the company that you're working for. And so we ended up working with sustainability startup companies. That was the market that we landed on, because again, it fell underneath her unfair advantage, which was incredibly important that we chose something aligned with that. Now, the offer was quite a good one as well, because she came from a position within her previous role is that she was doing everything and anything within the marketing space. She was kind of like a full rounded marketer, again, doing everything. That was a problem. Well, actually, it had its pros and cons. The biggest problem is that she wasn't a specialist. She was a generalist. She was a generalist marketer saying, hey, I can help you with anything. And that was kind of her offer overall. That is very, very difficult to sell to people, saying, hey, we can help you with everything and anything. So we needed to get a bit more specific. But to be honest, the way that in which Anya worked is that with the companies, she identified a specific result that she could produce, but it required doing a lot of different things. So she basically wanted to help these companies with their brand message, their brand voice, getting out there into the world through social media and different avenues, and basically just be more of like a marketing consultant to help direct them on what to do, when to do it, why to do it in order to push the right message. And so her offer was a little bit complicated because typically I would tell someone who would come and work with me, cool, we need to make sure your offer is specific. It needs to be, we help this niche achieve this result in this time frame with this unique mechanism, blah, blah, blah. With her, for example, however, we actually took the angle of basically being a Swiss Army knife. And the reason this worked is because she didn't start off fresh with the skill. She already was experienced in her skill set, so she already knew how to run it quite well. Now, if you're watching this and you're trying to learn a skill set for the first time, I would not be a Swiss Army of that skill set whatsoever. I would be a specialist within a certain avenue producing a certain result. For her specific situation, a Swiss Army knife positioned her much better, and it allowed her to really get the service across that she wanted to actually produce, which again was helping these companies with their brand voice and their marketing kind of all rounded, but doing it in a way that didn't make her sound like a generalist, but made her sound like a specialist being broad, if that made sense. And the best way we could do that was positioning her as a Swiss Army knife, which, if you don't know, a Swiss Army knife is one of those little gadgets that has like 10 different tools that kind of come off it, like knives and scissors and bottle openers and screws, all this kind of stuff. So it's basically one tool that solves 30, 40, 50 different problems. And that is what we positioned her as, a Swiss Army knife of marketing, which actually ended up working incredibly well because that allowed her to massively stand out within the space, which was fantastic. And now we move on to her skill. So her skill, as I've already actually mentioned, is just marketing. That was quite literally it. There was no specific avenue within the marketing that she was fantastic at. Actually, she was quite good at all of them. It was more about brand messaging, brand voice, and the consulting behind marketing as per to social media ads or PR management or something along those lines. It was more general. Her pricing wise was quite a unique one as well. Now, we landed on really focusing on pricing packages for her service because her service was quite complex. It was incredibly hard to do like a one size fits all kind of service where it's, hey, this is the one thing I offer. You're either going to pay for this or you don't work with me at all. So we needed to implement pricing packages, which I'll explain more about when we go through her game plan that we executed on. And her USP was basically her offer. Her USP was being the Swiss Army knife, or in short terms for this sake, SAC, Swiss Army knife, which basically allowed her to be a specialist in all those areas, which again is quite a unique angle to take, which you can only do, let me just emphasize, when you are experienced in your skill set. If she wasn't experienced in her skill set, that would be an absolute no-go because it makes her life very difficult. So those were the foundations of her business. Now the variables were quite unique, which I'll go into in more detail when we go through the game plan. In fact, let's go through the game plan now. Let's dive in. And the first step that we took, again, bear in mind, this is her going from nothing to a six-figure business, which is pretty cool. So the first initial step we took was actually to hone in on her skill. Because again, like I said, she came from the corporate world, so she had a skill set, but she didn't exactly know what that skill set would produce for somebody. And so we took the kind of approach of thinking, okay, cool, you've got a lot of experience. Now, experience is fantastic. It gives you an unfair advantage, but how can we use that experience and turn it into a business? Because the thing you've got to remember is that the skill, this part here, this is the centerpiece of the entire business. That is the skill, and that is the most important part of the entire business, because without that core piece, that bit in the middle, you don't have anything of value. You don't have any substance of value that you can actually sell to people. And so honing on her skill was number one. And now, like I said, she had the skill, but she wasn't sure of the service that she could provide with it. And so our goal was to figure out how can we take the skill that she has and turn it into an absolute weapon. And so we basically took the approach, as I believe I've already said, of turning her more than anything into a consultant. Because she had the Swiss Army knife of marketing angle that she was taking, it was hard to pinpoint that to one specific result. And so we went to the result of a consultant where she would help these brands, especially these startups, push their message and their mission that they're trying to achieve out into the world. Because for sustainability companies, which is the space that she was working in, it's incredibly important for them to make sure that people understand what their mission is and what they're trying to achieve, because that's what their companies rely on, that their whole message. You know, if they don't have the message, they don't have the meaning there, no one knows they are sustainable friendly company, and therefore obviously there's no point in them in the first place. So honing on our skill was number one, and we turned on a consultant that basically, you know, she helps create funnels, she helps create content, she helps to push out messages and brand meaning and stuff like this. But that was number one. That was step number one, honing in on her skill and actually turning it into a weapon as per to just like a nicety that is a feature on who she is as a person. Now, the second thing that we went ahead and did was kind of like a combo of three different things, which was market, offer, and pricing. Now, as I've already mentioned previously, when I spoke about the actual foundations of her business, her market, she was going for sustainability-driven businesses. Her offer was actually helping these sustainability-driven businesses with like a well-rounded area of marketing. And her pricing was the following. This was the interesting bit because it was very difficult to pinpoint on what her price would be. Like I said, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all service, so she had to break her pricing down into packages, which basically looks something along the lines of this. And this basically gave the brands that she was working with a menu to choose from. They gave them a menu of her services that they could pick and choose depending on what outcome they wanted, but it also allowed her to kind of take pressure off the sale, because having one service and one pricing on that service makes everything come down to that one service. So having pricing packages kind of makes it a bit more of like a, this is what we offer, what would you like? The brand ends up, or the company ends up selling themselves because they choose a package depending on what outcome they want. And this worked incredibly well for her because of the fact that it sort of allowed her to tailor to so many different kind of subsections of the company she was working with, depending on the size, the mission, what they were going for, what they had already and what they didn't have, which meant that she wasn't confined to like one company with one outcome, with one problem that she was trying to solve, which works in a lot of cases, but again, with her skill set, it just didn't make sense. And now the third thing that we actually focused on, as I mentioned before, was her USP. What is unique about her that allows her and her company to stand out amongst the other companies that are offering similar services? Now, she kind of had two USPs. One USP was actually the niche that she was working with. She was such a specialist within that niche, and she came from a perspective of understanding that niche incredibly well, which meant that she could deliver a result within the perspective that the niche she was working with really appreciated, because you can be a marketer for any company, but if you don't understand the specific subsection of people that you're working with and the way in which they want to deliver their product, then you're not going to be a specialist marketer for them, right? So it's almost like, if you're a marketer and that's your skill set, you can't just be a marketer for everyone and anyone. You have to narrow down, you have to niche down to a specific subsection of people that you can offer a specific service for, right? And in this case, it's a much more tailored kind of marketing solution. So because she worked or ended up working with sustainability-driven companies, it basically meant that when she did her outreach and when she had her conversations, these companies almost felt like she was a unique and bespoke doctor who had the medicine that they wanted that wasn't applicable to anyone else apart from them, which made the sale obviously really nice. And her other USP, as I mentioned before, was really just the Swiss Army knife of marketing, and like the whole well-rounded angle, well-rounded circle of marketing as a whole, as per just focusing on funnels or just focusing on content or just focusing on, upsells and downsells, whatever it may be. And once we had these foundations really locked in, so we had her skill that we turned into a service, we knew her market, her offer, and her pricing, and that was all locked in, and her USP, of course, we focused on the fourth thing, which was actually the plan to market, or in other words, how are we actually going to contact the people that we want to work with? What avenues are you going to use? Because especially when you have a service-based business, the options are quite endless, to be honest. You can run ads, you can do content, you can do affiliates, you can do word of mouth, like you can acquire clients through any way that you want. But our plan to market was a bit more specific one based on the experience and the advantages she had. And the thing that we decided to focus on, and not only double down on, but really triple down on, was actually LinkedIn. And the reason for this was because she had some experience of LinkedIn from her previous corporate role that she was working in, but not only that, but the service that she wanted to provide required her to have quite a lot of trust around her as a person, right? Because she was working with sustainable driven companies, she needed to make sure that she came across as a person who was perfect for them. It's not one of these services where you can really just, shoot a bunch of emails and just hope and fingers crossed that people are going to respond to you. She really wanted to showcase the kind of person that she was before actually doing the outreach for these companies, because she knew that these companies would value her if she came across as a specialist. And so we focused on LinkedIn. This way she could post content, she could talk about her previous experience, she talk about her expertise and really kind of show herself and her true colors. And not only that, but obviously you can use LinkedIn as an outreach method, which meant that she could start sparking conversations, she could build new relationships, build rapport with people through the DMs feature in LinkedIn, whilst also providing content in order to make herself come across as an authority figure, as a specialist in the space. So the plan that we actually utilized with that in order to make sure that we were maximizing LinkedIn is, like I mentioned, content was primary number one. This was basically just a case of posting every single day, and that was was a non-negotiable. It was like you have to post every single day, and there was kind of like a combination of content that we used. Now, one part or piece of the content or angle of the content that we made was actually just pure trust building, which is basically, allowing companies to really trust her as a person, or the decision makers within the companies to trust her as a person. The second thing that we did was actually content that positioned her as an authority. So it didn't only make people trust her, but it made people look at her as the person they would want to go to if they wanted to achieve the result that she actually provided. And the third thing that we, or the third angle that we took with content was actually purely just value, which meant that when we had trust building content and we had authority building content and we had value building content, we kind of had like a perfect trifecta of a content strategy that allowed people to trust her, that allowed people to know her and learn from her, and it allowed people to gain value from her. Because the way it works on socials is that when someone's able to receive value from you, they almost in a weird way feel like they're in debt to you. You know, if you watch someone on YouTube or Instagram or whatever it may be over and over and over again, and all you felt like is you got value from them, you also feel like you feel like you owe something in return. You know, if they were able to drop a product or a program, you're much more inclined to buy it because you're like, this person's provided so much value to me, I kind of want to give something back, you know, or you're just much more open to giving back. And that's why the trust aspect or the value aspect things worked really well, because it allowed them or her to open up more conversations with people because they already knew that she was a valuable person. And then basically we just combined these three things of content with a kind of strategy of putting out lead magnets. Now, lead magnets on socials are basically a way for her to really get an understanding of who within her audience would potentially be interested in her service. So we just integrated this into a content strategy where every now and then she would drop lead magnets through her LinkedIn, and she would drop things where people would comment, for example, or they would comment a keyword, they would DM her, follower, whatever it may be, and she would give them a fraction of what her overall service was. So, you know, her overall service is marketing. So potentially she would give them some templates or something like that, or some content strategy insights or whatever it may be. But when they commented, it told her this person is potentially a prospect, they are potentially a client, and they are potentially interested in my service. So it didn't only help her categorize her audience, who was interested, who's just a viewer, but it also allowed her to then start to, if we kind of loop back around, outreach to those people who are interested in the lead magnets and start sparking up conversations, and obviously turn those conversations into booked calls and those booked calls into signed clients. And we really prioritize this as kind of the main method of going to market. Reason being is because she already had an advantage of LinkedIn. Email wasn't the priority at this point. It did then become the priority as she wanted to scale, because LinkedIn, it was like she had that quite systemized, quite nailed down, and it was a case of like, where do I go from here? And email is going to be a fantastic option to utilize. So LinkedIn was kind of the primary number one to actually get her to that first 10K a month mark, which worked incredibly well. And then we started using email in order to scale her from that and beyond, which is awesome. The fifth thing that we did within the game plan was actually, funnily enough, increasing her price. Now, the reason for this is because she was actually getting a lot of interest. Like the social side of things, the content side of things was working incredibly well. The strategy we implemented got her a lot of interested people in her DMs, and it actually got her a lot of clients. It came to the point of where she actually kind of capped out on how many people she could work with because of the fact that she was a one-person team at the time. Now she's focusing on outsourcing and she's building a team. I'll put a screenshot up in the chat so you can see on the screen here, so you can see that's kind of what her focus is on at the moment, making sure that she can find people that she can outsource to and delegate to. But nonetheless, increasing her price also became a priority because she realized that it's almost like she's getting too many clients in a weird way, where there's a limit to how many people she can take on based on what she can deliver. So in order to make more money, you either get more clients or you make things more expensive. She can get more clients, and so we just focused basically on increasing the price of her packages, because it clearly showed that they were too low. Her service was too in demand to be charging the price that she was charging, and so we just kind of like added a zero or doubled her pricing. That was quite literally it. So we just I wouldn't exactly go through what her packages were because they're quite particular, but she kind of just increased each price a little bit and made the overall service come across as much more valuable. And the funny thing is that nothing changed with the interest. After increasing price, there was no extra no's, there was no extra let me think about it. It was just a case of that was the new norm. And it worked incredibly well for her because her service, the value that she was providing in her service constantly surpassed how much she was charging. And therefore there was no kind of like backlash and objection from her prospects when she was pitching that price. So that was the fifth thing we did, just increase that price. And that allowed her to pretty much like I wouldn't say double her revenue, that wasn't the case, but increase the amount of money that she was making quite dramatically. And then the sixth thing that we did, which is kind of what we're doing at the moment, or what she's focusing on at the moment, is really just systemizing and outsourcing. Because like I said, now she's at a stage of her business where she's producing a fantastic result. She's got the result quite nailed, quite locked in. So now it's just a case of, okay, cool, how can I buy back some of my time so all of my time isn't spent on each of these individual clients, and now her focus is on just hiring. So it's literally just on building a team. And what she realized previously, the kind of like hurdles that she's going through, just to give you some context, is that she hired someone, brought someone on board, and then she realized that, okay, the person is good at their skill set, but they're not as brought into the mission as they need to be within my agency. And so she's now looking for more people that she can kind of qualify a bit more intensely based on how interested they are in the actual mission that she wants to achieve with her company. And so that's what she's focusing on at the moment, systemizing and outsourcing in order to scale, because by systemizing and outsourcing, you are delegating tasks that she was taking on down to people who are still good at the task, but obviously allows her to buy back her time so that she can do the more high leverage tasks and focus on acquiring more clients and obtaining more clients, and therefore making more money. And so that is pretty much it. Now, this is a pretty brief game plan of how we actually did what we did, but that is it in like overall detail. Again, we identified her service that her skill could produce, which was being an overall marketing consultant, but it was still quite a lot of done for you within her service. Marketing, or market offer, pricing, all locked in and made sense. Her USP was super clear. We built out a plan to market, which was heavily focused on the content strategy. We increased her price just to make sure that she was making more money per client. And we systemized and outsourced, and that allowed her to buy back some of the time, but also focus on the high leverage tasks that helped her produce the best results possible. Now, Anya is one of the many students that I work with inside my Profit to Scale program, where we help individuals, freelancers, one-man agencies go from, having a skill set that works and is proven, and scaling that skill set to 10, 20, 30, 40K a month, without making any income claims. That's what we see on average. So if you're interested in doing something similar to what she did, whether you have a skill set, you come from a corporate background, you're a freelancer, click the link below at the top of the description. It will give you all the information that you need to see if it's an interesting kind of proposition and you want to join the inner circle. But trust me, if you come from this position of, I have a skill set, I want to make a lot of money from it, I promise you that we can help you out. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. See you in the next one.